I enjoyed The Monster, revisited by Netflix by Ciro Discepolo. I'll tell you why, but first, if you like, read the preface to my book, The Monster of Florence, published by Ricerca 90, Milan 2020, 150 pages. Preface. The Monster of Florence is a story that, as many journalists, investigators, writers, magistrates, and bloggers before me have observed, doesn't seem to have happened in Italy, let alone in the magnificent Tuscan countryside. The events it refers to, in fact, bring to mind the most gruesome Hollywood stories, television series based on the exploits of bloodthirsty serial killers, the profilers working at Quantico who have written much of the history of modern criminology, and so on. But anyone who immerses themselves even for a few months, like myself, in the immense ocean that is this case, perceives that it is, for several reasons, undoubtedly the most important in the world, and looms large over all others in terms of the number of years it has been marked by, the number of victims and suspects, several of whom have also served years of unjust imprisonment, the number of police officers and magistrates who have dealt with it almost full-time and for decades. But not only for this, many of the protagonists of this story, directly or indirectly linked to the investigation into the monster, have themselves also served decades of prison time for other crimes and murders, whose threads in some way are intertwined with those of Pacciani and his cronies. Alongside the anguish of the 16 young victims, some of whom were horribly mutilated, there are lesser-known facts, such as the fact that between the 1970s and 1980s, the family customs of that small area of Italy changed. Parents pretended to go to the movies to leave their children home, thus preventing them from retreating to the open countryside, which is only a few kilometers from Florence. It may seem like a minor scenario, but it has actually been studied by renowned sociologists. This long and tragic story has also revealed other less than edifying realities, such as that of the so-called voyeurs, people, even unsuspecting wealthy bourgeois and professional figures, united by a single passion, that of spying on couples, filming them, and even placing microphones under their cars. All this in virtual associations where those present were more or less always the same and knew each other by sight. One of these, ambulance driver Enzo Spalletti, was arrested in 1981, immediately after the third murder in the series, and told his wife the details of the June 6th crime. When questioned by investigators, he contradicted himself several times, and for this reason he was arrested as a presumed monster. But he was released months later, when the mastermind of this gruesome and long-running massacre struck again. Over the years, a wide variety of leads have been pursued, and even one of the leading scholars of the entire affair, Mario Spezzi, a reporter for La Nazione di Firenze, who had followed all the murders from the beginning of the series, was himself suspected and imprisoned. Moreover, some scholars of the case even go so far as to point to Pierluigi Vigna, the chief prosecutor of Florence, as the instigator or one of the instigators of these murders. This is also why I believe the never-ending mystery of the Monster of Florence surpasses all others, thanks also to the imagination of investigators, both official and otherwise. One of the leads pursued for decades was that of wealthy men, including those in institutions belonging to Masonic and or diabolical sects, who allegedly commissioned all these crimes, and as I said, even the chief prosecutor who led the investigation for a long time was accused by some as the instigator or an accomplice of the instigators. More than one of the suspects in the affair died under mysterious circumstances, starting with Pietro Pacciani, the farmer from Vicchio, first sentenced to life in prison, then acquitted on appeal, and finally died strangely while awaiting a new trial. Pacciani, it should be noted, had already killed a man caught having sex with his girlfriend and had served several years in prison. He then married another woman and fathered 2 daughters, whom he began raping from the time they were about 10 years old, and for many years even using rubber penises in these monstrous practices, considering that these daughters suffered serious mental damage from the repeated violence. Then there's the money involved, lots of it, so much so that no one has ever been able to explain how some of them, Pacciani and Mario Vanni, born into poverty, would have possessed a huge fortune. Mario Spezzi, the journalist for La Nazione in Florence, wrote a successful book with an American writer, a book that advances one of the theories we'll discuss later. Tom Cruise bought the rights to the book to make a film starring George Clooney as a police commissioner, but then it never came to fruition. In short, in my opinion, the Monster of Florence mystery is, by many accounts, the most incredible mystery in the world because, above all, like a Chinese box, it contains 1,000 other small Chinese boxes, all with their own stories and threads that very often intertwine with the threads of other boxes, as in the case of Enzo Spalletti, whom I've already mentioned, and who knows Francesco Vinci, one of the prime suspects in the Sardinian investigation. Vinci, in turn, is intricately linked to several key figures in the very first double homicide, the one on August 22nd, 1968. Many believe this shouldn't be included in the series of crimes, but according to other hypotheses, which I believe to be very substantial, it could be closely connected to all the others. Later, and not at the end of this book, I'll tell you my thesis, which largely supports the Segnini hypothesis, which you'll read about later. My contribution, if readers will judge it to be true, has been to shed more light on many dark corners of the story, primarily from an astrological perspective. I have, in fact, analyzed some of the prevailing theories, analyzing the protagonists' stars to assess their degree of compatibility. Dozens and dozens of people have had their say. Here, you'll also read mine. End of preface. So, I won't delve again into the merits of what, in many ways, is the biggest mystery in the history of global crime and of all time. If you're interested in my perspective, you can read the book, but also watch some free YouTube videos, read Facebook posts, my blogs, and so on. But here, today, I'd like to express only a favorable opinion of the release presented by Netflix last week. In my opinion, Stefano Sollima did well to offer us a single snapshot of the monster's never-ending story, a partial and legitimate vision of those events that even changed the social behavior of entire populations in those areas during the decades of general nightmare. Countless parents, got into the habit of going to the movies in the afternoon to leave the house free for their children, thus preventing them from driving into that countryside, which had become extremely dangerous. Stefano Sollima did well not to offer us yet another encyclopedic list of all the possible and even impossible leads in an attempt at all costs to put a face to the murderer or murderers. And it doesn't matter that he focused exclusively on the Sardinian trail, which I don't believe at all. The glimpse into that part of the Tuscan province and that period of time, with that special crime flavor that is a trademark of the author and director, is fiction, and that's fine, without necessarily bringing into play the black masses, supposedly deviant sections of the judiciary, journalists alike, and so on, to the sole advantage of all those who daily draw inspiration from the idea of conspiracy.